Okay, so picture this. You're out for a moonlit stroll on the beach, right? But instead of hearing those gentle waves, you're dodging some seriously high tides.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening right now on the East Coast. Flood advisories are in place, and get this, no rain in the forecast. So what's the deal?
Right.
Well, it seems our old friend the moon is putting on a show with this supermoon. We've got some articles here that break it all down.
Okay.
So let's figure out why a bigger, brighter moon means we get these higher tides.
Basically, it all comes down to gravity.
Okay.
The moon's gravitational pull is what drives our tides, and a supermoon just kind of ramps up the intensity.
Right. The articles mention that it's happening because the moon is closer to Earth in its orbit, right?
Yeah.
But it's not just an optical illusion, like it's bigger and brighter. It's actually physically closer.
It is, yeah. It's like the moon is leaning in and pulling on the oceans,
Oh, wow.
And you probably heard of spring tides and neap tides. Those happen because the sun's also involved in this gravitational tug of war. A supermoon basically amplifies that spring tide effect, which gives us those dramatic king tides.
King tides, that's a pretty intense name.
All right.
The articles mention New York City, New Jersey, even parts of Florida are bracing for these king tides. Some areas are expecting up to 4 feet of flooding. I mean, 4 feet, that's not just a little puddle, right? What kind of impact does that have?
No, definitely not. 4 feet of water, that's disruptive flooding. Think about it. Streets become rivers, businesses have to close, and homes could be at risk.
Wow.
These king tides, they can even overwhelm drainage systems and cause erosion. It's serious stuff. That's why you're seeing authorities taking these advisories very seriously.
And one article mentioned a storm system off the Virginia coast is adding to the already high seas, so it's like a double whammy.
It is, yeah. It's a prime example of how different things in nature can compound.
Right.
So you've got the supermoon with its amped up gravity, creating higher tides, and then on top of that, you add a storm surge.
Hold on, storm surge, what's that? For those of us who, don't live by the coast.
Oh, right, sure. Basically, imagine strong winds from a storm pushing water toward the shore.
Okay.
That's a storm surge. It's a temporary, but often really dramatic, rise in sea level on top of the regular tides.
So you combine that surge with the already super high tides from the supermoon.
Exactly.
And that's when things can get really intense, leading to some serious coastal flooding.
Exactly. And it highlights why it's important to understand these interconnected systems.
Right.
It's not just about the moon or a storm on their own. It's how they interact to make a potentially much bigger impact.
Yeah.
And that's where things get, really interesting. Well, at least scientifically speaking, when you think of tides as being predictable, and they are in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But when you start talking about these extreme events like supermoons and storms, accurate predictions become so important.
Yeah. Especially with all these added layers you're talking about. Makes you realize, a lot goes into those flood warnings they put out.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Predicting king tides isn't just about, okay, when's the moon closest to Earth?
Right.
It's about those local weather patterns, the coastline. Even the shape of the ocean floor can change how the tides behave.
Interesting. So it makes you appreciate how much goes into keeping people safe during these things. Speaking of safety, the articles mention some precautions people in these areas should take. What's that about? What do they recommend?
Well, the most important thing is awareness.
Okay.
Pay attention to those weather forecasts. And if local authorities are issuing warnings, take them seriously.
Right.
And don't underestimate the power of water, even if it looks like just a couple of inches on the road.
Yeah, one article had that crazy photo of a car submerged,
Right.
totally underwater, and it makes you realize how deceiving it can be.
Exactly. So, yeah, avoid driving through flooded areas, even if you think your car can handle it. You never know how deep it is or what's under there. And if you're walking around, just be really aware of strong currents,
Yeah.
especially near the shore.
Makes sense. This whole supermoon thing is super interesting from a scientific view, but it's important to remember those real-world impacts.
It is. And, this particular supermoon with these king tides, it's kind of a glimpse into what might become a more common scenario in the future.
Whoa, okay.
One of the articles even touched on rising sea levels.
Right, right.
What happens when you get that kind of tidal surge, but the baseline sea level is even a bit higher than it is now?
That's a really good question. I mean, we're already seeing these huge impacts, What does it mean for people living on the coasts if these events become more frequent, more intense?
What it highlights that coastal areas are only becoming more vulnerable,
Yeah.
Imagine those 4-foot tides we talked about. What if that becomes normal during a supermoon?
Right.
Increased risk of flooding, communities might have to move. Even the economy is impacted when you think about damage to buildings and
It's
businesses.
like this supermoon is like a wake-up call. These
Yeah.
forces of nature are powerful and unpredictable. And as sea levels rise, it's like the stakes just keep going up.
Yeah, they do. It really makes you think. It's like we're not just watching this happen. What we do, especially about climate change, it directly affects these things and what happens because of them.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in, oh, wow, a supermoon. But
Yeah.
when you understand how big of an impact it can have, it's like, okay, there's a responsibility there too.
Exactly. And it's not just about the people who live right on the coast. Think about it, the economy, how we get things, even just the cultural importance of these places. What happens on the coast affects everybody.
It's that interconnectedness you were talking about before, right?
Exactly.
Like, we're all part of this big system, this balance, and understanding how it all fits together is so important, especially now.
It is. And that's where we have to actually do something. It's
Mhm.
not about getting overwhelmed. It's like, what can we do as people, as communities, to deal with these risks
Right.
and adapt to things changing?
So what can people do? Besides not driving their car into the ocean during a king tide, which, maybe we should say that first.
Right. Good point. Let's start there. But seriously, being aware is huge. Supporting those policies that are trying to address climate change, protect coastal areas, getting involved locally, even just staying informed, it all matters.
It's true what they say, right? Knowledge is power. Or in this case, maybe, knowledge is preparedness.
I like that. It's not just about the science of supermoons and tides. It's about understanding what it means for us, for the planet, you
Yeah.
know? It's about being ready not just for the next king tide, but for the future, for what we're creating.
Wow. This whole deep dive has really got me thinking. I don't think I'll ever look at a full moon the same way again. It really is amazing how something that seems so far away can have such a big impact on our lives.
It really is all connected, isn't it? Sometimes it takes something like a supermoon, this celestial event to remind us of that.
Well said. And for our listeners, next time you're looking up at the moon, take a moment, really appreciate its beauty, its power, and just how it shapes the world around us. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deep.